After looking incredibly close at the first week of cross-divisional play in the first week since CBO Fort Worth, I have to admit we've seen some very interesting results. Now, the talk pretty much throughout the last few days has been centered around Luminosity and their inability to play teams because of being blacklisted by other pro teams because of the decision to run the Rampart. Now, we all know this about their massive changeup that they had, Classic's overall respawn performance, his changeup that he had from not running the Rampart to having it back in his hands. We've seen the stats, we've seen the numbers, and it makes sense. Now, I've spoke on this, and I mentioned rather a few days ago that I truly think that soon LG will adhere to other pro lineups and decide to not run it because of a lack of practice and based on the way that they're playing. I think eventually they're going to get to the point where they realize and say, okay, it's not worth it. Let's go ahead and adhere to what they're saying. Maybe our performance with the Rampart looked good at Fort Worth. Maybe we could still be a decent team without it. Maybe we're not the same team with the Rampart that we could be without it. Maybe there's not much of a change up and the decision to play other pro teams may be worth it in the end. Now, I could be crazy, but this is the way that I look at it. JKap, who currently remains on the bench, replaced by Simp this time last week, could be in a pretty decent spot. I talked about this on Double Tap's Torch and Time episode, that while this isn't the greatest scenario for JKap, this could actually work out very well from him. And at the time, it wasn't because Hunter T, despite their unfortunate circumstances, could have easily been in the grand finals at Fort Worth. Luminosity are hot off of a tournament win. Both of those teams, I think, are honestly the best fit for JKap. That's the reason why I referenced both of those two. And after looking at this past week, Luminosity could honestly be put into consideration again, because for those who don't know, the second roster change period is only a week away from today. It's only a week away. We're only 7 days away from the next roster change period. It begins on April 5th and goes all the way until April 22nd. That's 2.5 weeks filled with the possibility for roster changes. A lot of per sources, I'm sure, are going to be coming from that. But this week for Luminosity wasn't what many expected, considering they have just won an event. You'd expect hot off a tournament win and a 12-4 winners bracket record to dominate. You'd expect that team to come into the next week of the Pro League and just to dominate the competition, to play as well as they were, hot off a victory. Yet, this week, they go 2-2 in series. They ended up going 4-4 in hardpoint, 1-3 in control, and overall 5-7 in respawns. And it's making it seem like the team that won Fort Worth isn't the team that's now in the Pro League. It's making it seem like that the Fort Worth champions just happen to be a one-event type team. In their 3 controls this week, they lose 3-1, 3-0, and 3-0, and go 1-3 in total after a week prior at Fort Worth, where they went 6-1. Their best game mode by far in Fort Worth turns out to be their worst game mode by far a week later in cross-divisional play. And along with that, the team just doesn't look as confident. They really don't. They don't look nearly as confident as they did coming from Fort Worth. Just like I said, it's only been like a week. It hasn't been long at all. And so the fact that they have a total turnaround as a roster is quite surprising. Now, the team, and this is something that does worry me a little bit, right? Because Gunless at Fort Worth was by far the best player, true and deserving MVP, and that still remains. In terms of KD, Slacked was second, like Formal was third, I think Classic was fourth, and John was fifth. The coveted Big Three isn't performing up to the same standards that we really thought they would coming into Black Ops 4. John looks, like I said, totally out of sync. He does not look like himself at all, and as a player that we've deemed kind of as a Treyarch type player, we talked about his performance in Black Ops 1, his incredible resurgence, like I said, in Black Ops 2, Black Ops 3, obviously he was probably one of, if not the best SMG in the entire game. And I don't know if it's a role problem in Black Ops 4, if it's just a chemistry issue, whether that's apparent or not. So far in the Pro League, he hasn't looked stellar, and this previous week only brings down most of his stats. I mean, heading into the Pro League, or as a summary rather, he had a 0.97 hardpoint KD. Well, in this past week, he had a 0.84. He goes from a Search and Destroy KD of 0.85 to a 0.89. And Control, he goes from a 0.97 to a 0.77. Something is off, right? This is not at all typical John behavior, and with him being one of the biggest Big Three players, and also he's in a role that isn't affected by, I mean, it is affected because you are a team, but he doesn't have like another all-star SMG LG who's taking his kills. I mean, he is a guy who was supposed to be in the fray of the fight. I mean, he's when we talk about roles, etc. I mean, he's not surrounded by a Hook or an Abizi or a Priesta type of SNG player who could kind of be combating him for kills. I mean, he is known to be the Slayer in the SOG type role. And whether it's in need of an extra Slayer or a role change, it looks like something maybe needed to be changed up because the previous tournament champions don't look like themselves. And that could possibly be something to do with maybe not being scrimmed as much, by not being able to play in 10s lobbies. And I will say it and continue to, this was the team that JKap was meant to be on. This squad, or 100 Thieves, he was meant to be on this team to help collect the personalities and do pretty much put them all in shape, to let them work together, even knowing that LG would win one championship. If you were to tell me before Black Ops 4 started, would you rather keep JKap heading into this title and not have any guaranteed placements, or drop him and guarantee you win at least one? I am absolutely, no questions asked, keeping JKap instead. And they might be realizing that now. They could be realizing that over time, that, hey, maybe us losing JKap is kind of a big deal. Now, granted, we are just off of tournament win. We are looking pretty good, but they're inconsistent. And those inconsistencies have continued with them throughout Black Ops 4. Fourth at CWL Vegas to start off the year, to an 0-4 start to the Pro League. Then after that week, they happened to go on a 3-0 streak to end out the Pro League and go to a first-place finish at Fort Worth, and then go on to a 2-2 record so far after their win at Fort Worth. So, and even if it's not Luminosity, for me, someone is going to go for JKap, right? Someone is going to go for him. A team will add JKap to their lineup. I guarantee it. And if it won't be LG, let's say they work things out and manage to get a better placement, or start to kind of get on the same page, there could also be other options. And one of those options, I think, could actually be a team like Evil Geniuses. Now, I think that they need a total facelift. To be totally honest with you, I think EG, even after their decision to add attach to the lineup, my thought process was, okay, this isn't enough, right? The way that they closed out the Pro League, beating Reciprocity, it was an odd win for them to have. It didn't convince me that it was okay to just make a one-player type trade. It really didn't make enough sense for me. And so I think that roster needs a total facelift. They still have not been looking that great as of recent. And so I think if you can add some Slayers, if you can dramatically kind of change up by adding talent to this lineup, maybe, like I said, maybe JKap could be a good little fit to kind of throw in there. I also think my next interesting pick would actually be Envy. Maybe if not before Evil Geniuses, depending on who they have, because it's one of the most, this team for me, Envy, is one of the most difficult teams to predict right now. The one that has had the craziest results. They looked fantastic at certain points and just looked to be on the lowest of lows at certain points, and that has kind of been their identity since they won champs, right, last year. When they win World War II champs, they were coming into that title maybe as a top 8 team. And they obviously win the entire thing, barely taking down Optic Gaming in a 3-0 fashion, of which they have to do it that exact way. And they've kind of carried on with that same kind of knowledge, with that same kind of identity heading into Black Ops 4. And like I said, that team screams inconsistency. And I think that would also involve losing Aches to a certain extent if you were to add JKap to the team. But the most inconsistent team, grabbing the player that has the highest average placement at COD Champs. For anyone, getting a player that has been in 4 out of the 6 COD Champs Grand Finals would do wonders, right? You add Mr. Consistent to the most inconsistent team, obviously something is going to change up a little bit. Regardless, he will put a team in shape. If you have the right Slayers, and I've said this in the past, he's a point guard, right? He is coming onto this team to pass to shooters. Well, you supply him with shooters, and I promise you he's going to pass to him. He's going to be the Mr. Assist Man, as he was in World War II, with the most average assists per game in Hardpoint. He will straighten up a team, and he will make them work. There's a reason why JKap's name is out there the way that it is. There are only so many names that come to mind when you mention true Call of Duty greats. And you cannot tell the story of Call of Duty Esports without mentioning JKap. And you can't say that about many players. You absolutely can't. So I think coming into the benching situation for United, it seemed grim at first. It absolutely did. It did not look like the greatest situation, with the 2-time world champion sitting on the bench, putting in the new gun and saying, okay, well, there was internal problems. He and Clayster couldn't work together. Is there an ego problem with JKap? Can he not work with young talent? How is this going to line up? Regardless of all those questions, and as the dust has kind of started to settle, I think that he has options. Teams are going to have a lot of time to think about roster changes during this next period and the following week. They're going to have, rather, this is going to be the longest roster change period that we have out of the three. And with all that time, players are going to think. Players are going to think a lot. Overthinking can lead to a lot of rash decisions, right? Seeing Reddit threads and Twitter posts can put a lot of thoughts in your head, especially when you have 2.5 weeks to decide how you want your team to be looking heading into, like I said, following events that are coming up, even more possible league play, and knowing that there isn't a whole lot of time until Con Champs rolls around. There's one more roster change period, but you'd rather head into that roster change period knowing that my team is solid. If not, maybe we make a 1-for-1 trade, but we don't want to have a total facelift coming into the last roster change period, especially, but you have to keep this in the entire frame of mind, that franchising is coming up, right? Franchising is on the horizon, and making sure that you have some very solid players and making sure that you're looking solid coming into that particular year is the most important Call of Duty Esports has ever had. So preparing for that, making sure everything is in line is incredibly important. But all in all, as we take a look at the week ahead of us, we could see some very interesting moves, ones that I think could involve the defending champions of Luminosity.